David Swenson, thank you for joining us today at the Schiller Hamilton Podcast. This is a long time coming. We've been talking about this for a long time, but you've just been so incredibly busy with everything going on in York County that we haven't really been able to make it happen.
Hey, it's a tag team effort. You as, I guess, former
councilman.
You're busy.
It's the best title to have. The former, all the fun, but none of the liability, I guess. But thanks for coming in today. And, through my time on council, we spent a lot of time working together on some specific projects and big picture stuff. And, I think it's really beneficial to come in and kind of talk through, the process of economic development, what it looks like, what it even means.
Sure.
I think, people see headlines about new projects or they see, new stuff being built, but they don't always necessarily understand the why or the how or what or how it happened. And, I think people kind of take it for granted, especially around here, because we've been very fortunate to see a great deal of development. But you and I both know it doesn't occur without a whole lot of work. So, so your official title is Economic Development Director or Director of Economic Development for York County.
Correct.
A little bit of background. How long have you actually been in that position
So
now?
I've been here in York County for 8 years, just over 8 years. Been in the business, and this is my profession that I went to college for, like you with law school, and I get public administration, is that right?
Political science.
Political science,
Yeah.
Okay. So, this is a chosen profession, master's degree and everything. So I've been in it over 25 years at the local level, regional level, been in consulting. So I've been on that other side, the business side as well. So I just think we are blessed here in York County. There's a lot that's happened here, a lot that's happened because of team efforts, individual efforts, but collectively it's done successfully with team effort.
So I didn't realize that. I mean, I've known you for a long time, but you said when you went to college, you knew that this is what you wanted to do. How did you even know this type of position existed?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
So I'm from Minnesota, Twin Cities, suburb south of Minneapolis, St. Paul area. Grew up there, went to school in North Dakota, the other Notre Dame of the North, up in Grand Forks. And so economic geography is my undergrad, and a professor there that I got real close to was in consulting on the side. And so I did consulting projects with him and understood through him and through experiences, economic development, what's that? Oh, that's what it is. And they're doing it across the country, across the world. But in the United States, we do a good job at the local, state, and county level. It is different across states, but that interested me. I proceeded to say, well, if I'm going to make a career of it, do I need to continue my education? Answer was yes. I went to Southern Mississippi for the grad school program, specifically in economic development. Excuse me. And they do have that program still there. And then there's some others that have popped up in university settings. So people come into the profession in many different ways, backgrounds, experiences, and things. So that's mine, and I've been blessed.
Yeah. So coming out of your master's program, what were the first areas that you went to work in?
So I ended up going right into first, entry-level research and marketing role, Chamber of Commerce setting.
Yeah.
Then
Where
regional,
was that?
Up in Asheville. Started up there. That was a short tour because I realized a couple of things. One, it's not very flat land.
Right. It's tough to pad out a site on the side of a mountain.
It was. And I was young and I'm thinking that was great. And it was a short term, but it was just something I realized, and through some connections and opportunities, I moved down to Columbia. And I was down there in the regional group there, and then moved up to Greenville, and then up to this area. So Charlotte's in the region of Charlotte is fantastic. It reminded me a lot of home, the Twin Cities, with the growth and the things that are happening, quality of life balance, that kind of stuff. So.
That's awesome. So when you're at a cocktail party, and you say you're in economic development, how do you explain what that actually means?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the topic itself gets people interested. It's a topic everyone wants to support. Not a lot of people understand truly what it means. We can talk about some of that here today. But I look at it as this: as I'm just here as one person, one leader in a group that's trying to make the economy better. We're trying to make our community better for all, because what we do impacts a lot of people. And I always remind our team, we drive around the community and you see that building and the cars parked in that of that company that you helped. I can go around this county right now and say, I remember when we took the call on Southwood, that's on 161, and what did we do to help them? What meetings did we facilitate? What incentive proposal did we put together and analyze? And then you see the cars there, or you walk through their building and you see the people employed. That has meaning. That makes your heart really, feel good.
There's people supporting their families and earning their livelihood from that. So one thing that I'm curious about, so I think a lot of people, when they think of economic development, in their mind, everything kind of gets lumped into that, whether it's residential. I mean, they think of economic development, they think growth, they think people, they think all of those things. How do you separate or define the differences between economic development, economic growth, and maybe just growth?
Absolutely. Great question. And it started early in our graduate school days. We had this debate, and this professor challenged us, how do you define that? And so when you look at economic development, first of all, understand it's a process. It's not one event. It's not one thing one entity does. It's a collective process that we all work through, and the front end to prepare ourselves, and the back end when you have the end results happen. And that's the improvement of your economy, so that you see a growth in the tax base. You see the jobs created that create value for the families and the persons that are working. You see the community schools improve because the tax base grows. You see the businesses become successful because maybe they got an incentive to come here and it helped their bottom line to be profitable. The list goes on of the benefits, but it is a process that we as economic developers facilitate, working with community leaders like yourself and others here in the state and in the local community to create the wealth.
Yeah.
That's what it boils down to. Now, the difference between economic growth and economic development, I equate it to a pile of rocks can grow, right? Can grow in size and width and height. And economic development is, okay, that pile grows, but are there shiny rocks? Are there sharp rocks? Are there big rocks? Are there small rocks? What rocks are of value to go, make that cobblestone street? Or I'm trying to simplify it a little bit, or a pile of leaves. Are there colored leaves that are really cool? They're small leaves, big leaves, broken leaves. We want the best makeup that creates the best scenery, the best view. Now, it takes work. It takes understanding. It takes commitment. It takes vision. And that's the process side. There's art and science to what we do. But it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens with intentful purpose.
Yeah.
And that's what, it is a challenge in some of the things when we are successful. And I think you've said it before, businesses aren't going to come just because we get great quality of life.
Yeah.
That's part of it, but it's not the end all be all.
Right. And I think that, there's a lot to unpack in all that, but I think, basically where you left off is maybe a great place for the next jumping off point. So you mentioned quality of life. You mentioned, the incentives and everything. What? Tell me about the sorcery. What is the list of the most important factors that go into the decision-making process for a business looking to either expand or move into a new area?
Yeah.
And then kind of how, on the economic development side, I guess the second piece of that is, how do you try to move the needle to nudge those decisions?
Yeah. Great jump into it. So many factors are out there that communities and maybe their consultants weigh as far as, okay, if I'm going to make a business decision and put that new facility, new plant that manufactures the next greatest widget, or do an expansion of an existing company, those are the areas that we try to help facilitate. And so they evaluate sometimes desktop that we don't see that evaluation or part of that evaluation. They may look at where's decent labor force, where are locations that are in proximity to an interstate or an airport or a port of entry with ships, things like that. Maybe it's proximity to customers. So there's a lot that happens upstream that we don't influence necessarily. But when we get the call, we'll get the call from site consultants or the Department of Commerce or companies direct. And they'll ask us, okay, we have a request for proposal or information. Send us what you have on your available buildings or sites. Tell us a little bit more about your workforce. Tell us more about the assets of your utilities. What's the capacity and costs? They ask us for information about taxes and incentives. We respond to that. Our customer service is our number one resource, but the data information that we share and the follow-up that we do helps us get down the decision-making funnel.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key thing. Do not get cut if you can avoid it. So where we can impact the information that, and again, we're not going to make up information because they can check it, right? And so our information that we share, we are very confident in it, and then we hope we don't get eliminated. Now, there's some times where it's a negotiation, things that we deal with counsel and others that, the company says, all right, we want to go from 10 sites down to a selected maybe 3 or 2. And then those negotiations happen, and we may work on a fee in lieu of tax incentive or a state incentive with them. Those get inked contractually. Let me back up. Before all that, we do evaluate, do we want that company or not, when we talk about incentives, and we can talk about that more later. But the reality is it's a process that we try not to get eliminated. We get down the funnel. We hope that there's a win for us, and sometimes there's not. We recognize that. We're not the end-all, be-all to everybody, or we'd be full already. But when we do win, if the company wants to celebrate, and we will celebrate.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are situations they don't want to announce. They come and they don't want to announce. Not usually, especially when there's tight labor market times. They want to announce the heck out of it because it tells people they could be employed at that company.
Yeah, they put the flag and the beacon up, and
absolutely,
it's like sending up the bat signal. Come.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, those are the factors: workforce, your product. Again, product meaning sites and buildings. Let me stress that for us to sell the community, just like a car salesman wants to sell cars, you got to have product.
Got to have inventory.
Got to have inventory. And so we're a little weak on inventory on sites. Buildings, we have buildings out there. Definitely on sites that are ready to go that could be sold. So we're similar to the U.S. market with vehicles. There's not a lot of inventory out there.
Yeah.
But we're trying, and we need to keep working on it. Business climate, taxes, incentives kind of make that up. But also regulatory and the availability to process things, like our zoning and planning development team. Met with them this morning, was on a call also at 1:00 with a prospect. I can't say enough about how responsive our team is. I'm blessed that when I make a call and they take it, it's usually they're going to help. They will go out of their way to help. So that's a business climate advantage for us.
I got you. And so again, it's kind of difficult sometimes because we start talking about all this and my mind goes in a million different directions. So it's hard to keep narrowed into one line or train of thought. All this kind of happens. You have all these different factors that companies are considering, but what you described is a process where you're contacted. A site selection company is contacting you. Yep. And I suppose that means that at that point, we're sort of on the menu. Like you're on a list of places that they're considering.
Right.
So what are and you mentioned kind of staying in that funnel, like don't get eliminated. That's the name of the game. Just stay in it till the end until you're down to 1 or 2 sites that they're selecting from, and then you have a chance. You mentioned sites and some of the other things, but what do you see? What are the biggest reasons why we might get scratched off that list?
Sure. So sites would be one of them. And in the realm of that characteristic, let's touch on something I think you and I are kind of familiar with. When there may be a site available in our community, but it may have a control by a private entity that has a different plan in their pricing and their plan for development of that. It may keep us in the game for a little while, but when there's an alternative location that was available at no cost or low cost, the companies evaluate that element, and sometimes we'll lose on that. Okay. Utilities, where we may have enough utility services for first phase, but we may not be able to handle second phase. So it's a risk to the company to choose us, whereas maybe another location, that's not a problem. They can handle all the phases of the needs. Taxes, that tends to be something that gets evaluated hard.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we use our incentive tools to offset the high costs of property taxes in the case of what we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
Income tax, sales tax tends not to be an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Incentive-wise, we do hear often the cash grant element. I will say this, the number one thing about incentives, and I'll get back more into your question, is incentives are performance-based in the state of South Carolina. And there is no open checkbook that just says state or locals can just write a check and here you come to us. I think quality of life in the schools and the perception of that, oftentimes they'll think, well, you're in the South or you're in South Carolina, schools are bad and all that stuff. We have to tell them the truth, tell them the data points, tell them the comparatives in some cases. That's really key. The other thing that's starting to surface up, Joel, that it's not new. It's been around a little while, but it's really become an issue, and that's affordable housing. And saying if we have our workforce and we're going to pay them certain wages, and it's across a spectrum of wages based on employment breakdown, but production employees, going to make less than management and technical people, but can the production employee wage rate even be affordable for them, allow them to live here? And that's a big, big issue.
Yeah.
And so, not saying that's our number one delineation item when we get kicked out, but it's more of a sensitive market issue.
Are you finding, well, I guess this kind of gets into the broader economy, but maybe before we go that way, I want to ask you this. So you again, you mentioned, when we're contacted, and I guess to some degree that's the top of the funnel. But what do we know about what else is out there? What do we know about the lists, that were scratched off of before they even contact us? Like, in other words, what's the real top of the funnel that maybe we're not aware of, and what does economic development do to on the proactive side to either market or reach out to companies that might be thinking about relocating? So
the areas where we may have interest in being in winning position on but struggle. Okay, so if we're going to attract headquarters, one of the things is we're part of the Charlotte market. That's a good thing, but the challenge with that on the headquarter recruitment side is they may want the Charlotte address specifically, or that density urban environment. We have offerings that they could consider, but they are build to suit situations, meaning the company has to have a building built for them that suits their needs, versus maybe they could lease space up in Uptown or up in the university.
It's turnkey, ready to go.
Exactly. So speed to market is more attractive for them there. There are other elements to, like, let's say manufacturing. We are a state that's done very well with manufacturing. We got great OEMs with Volvo, Boeing, BMW, Michelin, those kind of folks. We don't really have a major OEM here. We have a lot of supplier base for those folks. But let's say pharmaceutical, right? There's a state SC Bio initiative here, but we're not a state known for that. Now, if you want to get aspirational and do that, there's a lot of things we're going to have to change, right? Maybe you have a tier 1 university that does more in that space, but you got an uphill battle to compete against the Raleigh, the Boston, the West Coast areas, Austin, Texas. So know what you're good at and play to that strength. Know that if you're going to get kicked out on certain things, is there a way we can mitigate any of those factors with some degree of lift or attention and effort, and it's not going to break us, it's going to be doable, or is it really insurmountable? And those factors are things we evaluate in our strategic planning, in our goals and our objectives, and that's collective. That's not just York County, that's a state effort. And by the way, the state of South Carolina is actually in process of updating a strategic plan for the state. Long time coming. We are stressing, and I think you've talked about it, is we have to be a service-focused economy. More and more of our GDP, which our local GDP is $11 billion.
Pretty significant.
Yeah, of that 1.7 is in manufacturing. A lot of it also is in the service sector. So gotta just stay attuned to it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little. So you're touching on my next train of thought, which is local market conditions versus the state of South Carolina, maybe all the way out to global. What do you see kind of where we are right now in relative terms to maybe other markets? How competitive are we? How competitive are we within the state, outside of the state? And how would you describe like the current conditions of the market in your county?
Oh, it's great. We are very competitive. So workforce being the number one concern and question by companies. We are in a growth market. We're in the top 2 counties, top 3, but Lancaster County is number 3. We're number 2, and Horry County is number 1 in population growth. So we know the supply and availability.
We're not getting much manufacturing or commercial in Horry County. Though it's just all people.
Exactly.
All the
retirees.
Yeah, all the costs, none of the.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we get looked at from that perspective, and we compete very well. I think we compete very well, even more so than Greenville-Spartanburg market and Columbia. Columbia has a workforce pipeline with the universities that are located there, but it's just not known for manufacturing, and it's known for service. But we're part of the Charlotte market close to the international airport, so we can compete very well in that regard. The housing growth that we've had here has helped support that. Schools and the recognition that, yes, we have great performing schools, some of the top in the state, and people want to live here. So that dynamic is fantastic. Available product, we have buildings, we have the interstate, so that gets us looked at, and we do compete against the I-85 corridor and up into North Carolina, the 40 and 85 corridor up there. We'll compete a lot against that. In the Charlotte region, the 16 county region, we get a lot of looks because people like to look on the south side of Charlotte because your proximity to the airport's fantastic. It's quicker to get to the airport from a Rock Hill, Fort Mill location, and you can even say sometimes the Clover, Lake Wiley area, than it is in the northeast side of Charlotte. So,
or sometimes even from uptown.
Yeah.
Like
absolutely.
if you're just anywhere in Charlotte, you have to get through the traffic just to get on the roads to take you to the airport. So, so that's the good things about being in the Charlotte market. You know, obviously the Charlotte market has some juice, it has some momentum.
Right.
So there's some attention there. So a lot of companies are gonna put it on their list to look at. But let's pretend one of those companies in their decision making process narrows it down to the Charlotte market. We have the advantages from the Charlotte market, us being in the Charlotte market. Yeah. What are the disadvantages, and can you talk a little bit more about, how competitive we are within the actual Charlotte market?
Yeah, so the challenges that we face is, in some cases, some of these firms will ask about, well, what are you doing for public transportation? And how are things related to diversity, equity, inclusion? Is there a hate crimes bill in your state? Been asked that question. We don't have one. It's one of the issues. We're one of, I think, 3 states that has not passed hates crime bill yet. Public transportation, we can answer that question in that, yes, we do have it. Rock Hill has implemented it. It's been in, 3 years now? The challenge there is, can we grow it, diversify it? Meaning maybe do we see a light rail system come down from Charlotte? Challenge there is you got to have collaborations with Charlotte and CATS.
Yeah. And they want to control it.
Yeah, exactly. Planning on our road system and our other assets, if it's the water systems and things. I know there is regional discussions and leaders from our utilities do talk. I know on the road side, the MPO situation, you've been involved with RFAT's a good bit. And we have multiple MPOs in the Charlotte region. So how do you dial that in? Especially when you've had the big spend out of the federal government in the last few years that says they're willing to put our federal dollars to play in markets that have plans, can take them off the shelf and implement them right away. And if we don't have alignment, it kind of makes it harder for us to say, we're going to go see the big improvement in that interstate or that public transportation asset. So those are kind of the big picture challenges. I would say specifically for us in economic development in York County and the Charlotte region where we compete against each other, taxes, the property tax equation is high in South Carolina. So we have to overcome that, and that challenge is real.
Yeah.
We've been successful, but we can't be resting on our laurels.
Yeah. Okay, let's dig into that a little bit, since that's where we finished up again. So, tell me more about our property tax rate relative to the rest of the Charlotte market that we're competing with on the North Carolina side.
Yep.
And, in terms of actual numbers or factors, how does that become important in a business's decision-making process and site selection?
Yeah. So let's talk about, let me set the stage first, the incentive question or the topic. There are state incentives. There are local incentives. I deal in the local space. I'm aware of the state space. The state, our Department of Commerce, statutory incentives and discretionary incentives. Mm-hmm. They focus on job growth, the value of the jobs, and then they offer a tax credit or a rebate and a grant program that gives money back to the company on a performance base. Mm-hmm. That's a state. So let's talk about local. Local incentives are performance-based again. They are what we call the discounting of the cost to doing business in your county or the municipality.
Performance-based, you've mentioned a couple of times. Tell me real quick, metrics and what that means.
So just by the minimum metric of the state statute to do what we call the fee in lieu of tax. So a company would regularly have to pay ad valorem tax, property taxes on real and personal property. What we do is we enter into an agreement, and it's a fee they pay in lieu of that tax. Mm-hmm. So that minimum is $2.5 million to be considered for an incentive in the state. And there's things that happen with that incentive that makes it advantageous. The threshold bar is a little bit higher in York County. When they passed that legislation at 2.5, it really was done to help the rural areas of the state. Mm-hmm. Not that we wouldn't, entertain the request, but really, council, and you've been on council, our bar is set higher than that.
Yeah.
So the reality is we take and evaluate the ask, we discount the cost, because the cost, back to your point in question, the cost in South Carolina, in York County, compared to what we competed the most on is, let's say, Gaston County, Charlotte, Catawba County, Cabarrus County, Lincoln County, is anywhere from 2 to 4 times higher in cost penalty in South Carolina and York County than those locations. Mm-hmm. So if we are going to compete and the company says, I'm looking at those other locations, how can you make you more attractive or the chosen location cost-wise? We have to discount the cost of our operations here, the widget. And so we take our assessment rate and put it at 6%. We can put a discount coupon on it. We call it a special source revenue credit. Mm-hmm. I call it a coupon. Americans like coupons. Mm-hmm. And then that sets the tone for time. And usually we'll set these agreements anywhere from 20 to 30 years. For the big investment projects where they're over $150 million and 125 good paying jobs, we can go to a 4% assessment rate. And to set the stage on this, business is at 6% now in taxes on ad valorem. Residential's at 4%. Mm-hmm. Commercial property, let me say it, businesses, industrial's at 6%. Commercial's at 6%.
Which is new.
It's new. That's a plus.
10% was a huge number.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a good thing the legislature did. Kudos to our team, local and state, that supported that. But the fee program is still important. Mm-hmm. Has to be used. We use it wisely. We do a economic fiscal impact model on every project, and we report that to our council. Mm-hmm. We report on the benefits, overall data points that are considered, and we also review every performance annually with the Department of Commerce, the performance on each fee in lieu of tax agreement, which we have over 85 of them. Why do we have them?
Yeah, I know what I wanted to ask you. Okay, so you mentioned that our default ad valorem tax rate is 2 or 3x what the default rate would be in the Charlotte market above the line, North Carolina. So, you're talking about some of these FELOs and incentives, which effectively are oftentimes 25 or maybe 50 with the special source revenue credits.
Correct.
25 or 50%. I can do that math. That doesn't get us to equal on their default before they even lift a finger and do anything. So, how do you overcome that discrepancy? And can you kind of put that in terms of real dollars? So if you're looking at a 10 or 20 year, model, if you're a business, and you don't just look at, well, this year we're going to pay this compared to this. You're looking at the next at least 10 or 20 years. Over a 10 or 20 year model, let's call it our average project in like the $20 to $50 million range. Mm-hmm. What does that mean in terms of dollars over the life of that model?
That's a great question. I have to go back and look at those numbers.
Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this. It's all about predictability and reliability of the numbers. So where we model out to companies and say, we're going to help you in the first 5 years, like you said, give you a staunch credit, pay 50% for 5 years. Yeah, that really reduces the net effective rate. Goes from maybe what is the effective rate, what they pay on their property of, 2.5% to 3%, down to maybe 1.5% maybe. But the problem is North Carolina and Charlotte, for instance, is paying under 1% effective rate. Yeah. So when they put their coupon on, which they do, they have grants, they have a reimbursement grant program for 5 years, maybe 10 years in some of the counties up there. They're basically giving away the taxes. Yeah. Absolutely. We've done the calculation comparison. Now what happens though is when those grants roll off, they bump up the taxes, right? It goes back to the regular taxes, and those rates have increased over time. Mm-hmm. So it really does help us in that we keep our growth rate in our taxes no to slow, let's say, because we have a program where we can either lock in the millage rate so it doesn't change at all. Mm-hmm. And they just know their predicted payment every year for 30 years, let's say. Yeah. Or it's adjusted every 5 years. And that's just an average looking back prior year. It slows the roll of the tax increase. We've been typically doing those more often, probably in the last 2 years, every one of them, because there's a feeling, and I agree with this, is that let's support our schools. Right. The bulk of our tax millage rate, as you know, is in our school millage.
It's like 65%?
Yeah, right around there. So it makes sense, but also we have to do it and maintain our competitiveness.
Right. And that's such a difficult balance because, obviously one of the points of economic development, you mentioned the jobs, but the other side of it is the tax revenue. I mean, you want the project because you want the tax revenue. It takes the burden off of the rooftops.
Absolutely.
But you don't get any net new money without offering some type of incentive and doing the hard work to actually get it. Yeah. So I had this conversation with someone the other day, and it dawned on me. I remember, when, I was getting married and, shopping for rings, and someone told me, they were like, don't worry about the price because that's not the actual price. It's like, and it dawned on me that in a way, like South Carolina is kind of like the jewelry store that marks the price way up just so they can say they're giving it to you for 50% off. Yeah. And that really becomes the normal effective rate. And that no one that you're actually landing is going to pay full retail, because if you land them, they're just not going to. Like that's just not the way it works.
In a perfect world, we'd have everything set at a price. You didn't have to negotiate. But there's a commerce clause in the United States Constitution that says companies have the right to maximize profit, earn profit. There's also the state rights that talk about how they can set their costs of operation, taxation, that being. Mm-hmm. And so, we have to play, call it a game, call it a process, whatever you want to call it. We have to go through that effort because we're looking out for our citizens. We're looking out to maximize the benefits that companies bring. And remember, they bring it because they see value in us. They see good, maybe schools, workforce that has a cost. Yeah. They're not shy about paying it. They just want to pay their fair share or get that coupon and a discount because they know they can ask for it. Our legislature allows for it. Our local communities allow for it. We're selective to a degree. We know what good projects are. We've landed a lot of them. We will continue to land a lot of them. We want to maximize more. I would say this, though. The idea of incentive, there is tax incentive. That's what we focused on here. There are other elements to incenting communities, like we're taking care of our green space.
Mm-hmm.
We're putting in parks and recreation, trails and things.
Mm-hmm.
We have good road system. Things that we do that are sort of the tangible and intangibles outside of tax incentive are incentives.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to ever lose sight of that. I know community officials or citizens will sometimes say, why do you give those companies, big companies, incentives? They don't need it. We have great quality of life here. They should just come. They should be knocking on our door. Well, they knock, but there's also the competitiveness nature that we live in.
Yeah. So in other words, it's only everything. You've got to have all those things. How do you win? You have to have everything.
Exactly.
And, we are very, thankfully, there's economic growth within this country, and, people are building, new manufacturing facilities all over the place, but it is very competitive, and each of these companies can spend the money to put it wherever they want.
Yep.
And if you want to win those projects with any degree of consistency, you really have to just be great at all of those things. You've got to have the quality of life. You've got to have the schools. You've got to have the infrastructure. You've got to have the proximity to the airport. You got to have the workforce. You have to have the workforce training and not just the whole labor shed.
Absolutely.
I mean, you've got to have every piece of the pie as well as be competitive in your tax rate.
Yeah.
So in other words, it feels like it has to be overwhelming because economic development is really everything. I mean, if it's parks, if it's infrastructure, someone like you in your position really has to keep their finger on the pulse of all that just so you can, to have those conversations with any confidence with companies that are reaching out to you, I suppose.
Absolutely. And two things to stress on that. One, we are competing in the world, right? Mm-hmm. So where we had a lot of our industry in South Carolina, we know this for a fact, textiles went overseas. Mm-hmm. Woodworking, cabinetry stuff went overseas, mm-hmm. right? Now, what set that off, right? Well, it's more about the market said we want lower cost goods. We didn't care about it made in the U.S. We do now, mm-hmm. but we didn't back in the 80s and the 70s, maybe in the 90s there, where it's just like, oh, it's just going overseas. Look at mm-hmm. that plant closed. We saw that firsthand here. That's an economic national policy decision. You bring in what we just did in the last 4 to 6 years mm-hmm. under Trump, where we called a spade, and we said, listen, no, it's detrimental to us if we ship everything over to China, mm-hmm. made overseas. We need to bring it back here.
Yeah.
Make America great again, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can agree with that because the products, they may have a little bit higher costs because of labor or some of the other inputs to that cost of that product. Mm-hmm. But to make it here has other trade-offs.
Yeah.
So that's an economic policy that I think we got to look closer at in economic development. Doesn't mean, though, that we don't still have trade. Mm-hmm. Trade is huge. We need to have things made over in Europe that get bought over here and vice versa. That's just good relationship building and good for our world economy. But the other thing that I think you stressed on, and I take this serious in that it's not all on my shoulders. It's not all on my team's shoulders. It's not on our community leaders' shoulders. It's on everybody's shoulders mm-hmm. to do their part to make our community good, where if we have a homeless issue now, we all need to recognize it and do something about it.
Yeah.
If we have a crime issue or problems in our schools, it's all our responsibilities to do it. And that's not to say we need to implement socialism, mm-hmm. communism. No, it's about being responsible as citizens in our community that say,
without relying on government, just individual decision making.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, government is an arm that mm-hmm. can do certain things, has responsibility to do certain things, just as business in the market does too. Mm-hmm. Combine the two, public and private partnerships. Hey, man, it works. Mm-hmm. It can work.
You mentioned, the challenges or, relationships and trade with Europe, China, perhaps. With rising energy costs in Europe, demographic and population crunches in Europe, demographic and population crunches in China, 250 million people under some form of light lockdown in China, and another 90 million under heavy lockdown. 340 million people under some form of lockdown is a very difficult way to operate an economy.
Yeah.
Are you seeing more, maybe opportunities to bring German manufacturing into South Carolina? Are you seeing nearshoring with companies looking at divesting themselves of or not being as dependent on manufacturing in China, for instance? Are you seeing any tipping points recently with some of these big global shifts that seem to just come upon us?
Yes, we have. So let's take industry sectors where we know that the Inflation Reduction Act and there's like 2 or 3 other major federal passed legislation helped facilitate market change to our economy.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening fast and furious, I call it, but it's going to only impact us over time the next 3 to 5 years because not all that money gets spent at once. But companies are active in the electric vehicle area, either the OEMs,
mm-hmm.
and you can hear about those in the paper pretty much regularly now, or supply base.
Mm-hmm.
We see a lot of their supply base here. They've looked if it's the folks who make the product for the battery systems themselves or the other parts in the vehicles,
mm-hmm.
That's active. The semiconductor industry,
mm-hmm.
absolutely active because why? The federal legislation and policies now are supporting that to be made here. And we've seen activity, and we hope to see some good news in the next quarter.
Yeah.
There is renewable energy interest,
mm-hmm.
right? Not only in the implementation of solar fields that create the renewable energy. We won't see wind here, but we see the solar energy potential.
Mm-hmm.
But those who make the solar cells and solar panels. So there's upstream potential, there's downstream.
And all that used to be overseas, but now all of a sudden you're seeing, interest with all that coming back here,
Absolutely.
right?
And that's economic policy. That's what our federal government said. This is in our best interest. Now, to say we have interest by companies from Europe or Asia
mm-hmm.
that want to come here and be in the United States to have American-made content rule
mm-hmm.
qualification, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
From Canada even, in fact, because it has to be made in the United States. That's the rule to get the benefit. Germany is our biggest makeup of local company base ownership mm-hmm. of international firms. UK, France, Japan, Canada. I mean, it's a great mix in the Charlotte region, the state mm-hmm. of South Carolina, and here in York County. We saw extreme slowdown, stop during COVID.
Yeah.
It has picked back up. We're fortunate in that the state of South Carolina has relationships through their office they have in Munich.
Mm-hmm.
It covers Europe, and it's been there for, decades.
Mm-hmm.
We have a good relationship there. I've gone over there probably twice a year on mission trips with the Department of Commerce.
Yeah.
Working with the 77 Alliance and that kind of thing. So we have relationships that will continue and need to continue through international commerce.
Yeah.
We need to do it.
Now, has the war in Ukraine and obviously the shutoff of energy supply to
mm-hmm.
Germany, I mean, they were getting basically everything from Russia. Just since then, in the last few months, like last 6 months or so, are you seeing almost like an anxiousness to try to figure out another manufacturing floor for that part of the world?
Yeah, there's definitely, I know there's a big project looking at Chester County right now, and that's energy intensive. Mm-hmm. And there are definitely interest in the United States because of the concern about power rates, power sourcing availability. It's interesting, though, in some of the criteria that we've seen with the Europeans, their focus on carbon footprint.
Mm-hmm.
They'll ask us oftentimes, it starts out with probably in the top 5 questions. So if we come there and we're buying power from you, how do you source your energy production?
Yeah.
Okay, well, here in South Carolina, a lot of ours is through nuclear power. Mm-hmm. We're a nuclear power state. Some people will say, well, that's carbon footprint okay, or some say that's carbon footprint bad. It just depends how you define renewable energy.
Right. Not necessarily renewable, but low carbon
footprint. Yeah. So more people are okay with it than maybe were even just 5 years ago because of the coal push or natural gas kind of curtailments in Europe, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have what's considered old technology as well with the hydro that we have locally. And,
yeah.
Is that almost like forgotten as a source of renewable energy? Because I know the big focus is always on, where are we going to put wind and solar?
Right.
But we have hydro. I mean, that's
absolutely.
Yeah. And so what's the reaction when you have those conversations?
I think it's positive. I mean, there's been a couple projects in the last year that we bring up the percentage of the pie, how they break it out, coal versus hydro versus nuclear renewables. Mm-hmm. I think what the challenge is in this is how much more could you do in the renewables? And a lot of people focus on the solar.
Yeah.
But, battery technology is starting to come up,
mm-hmm.
Commercial scale,
mm-hmm.
battery storage, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Where you have maybe minimal solar out there, but you can store power for those times like we have cold spells where Duke went into curtailment. And I'm not pointing a finger at Duke, but that's the reality. They went into curtailment.
Right.
A lot of because they had to take their coal plants down for, time to handle offsite or what do they call it when you cycle them down for maintenance.
Yeah.
Right. Well, they did it at a bad time. Unlucky time, I should say, too.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about how our power stacks up, because that's really interesting. So if we're mostly nuclear and mostly hydro, sprinkle a little bit of solar on there, increasingly so over time. In a competitive landscape where, Texas, for instance, is moving towards, not hydro, but solar and wind, do we maintain competitiveness in the next 5 or 10 years? Do companies become increasingly sensitive to power stack issues and carbon footprint issues? And how do they weigh, that desire to maintain a low carbon footprint versus consistency of power output, based on their own supply chains? Because we've had some of these conversations with companies, and it's like if they have the slightest glitch or blip in their power supply, it's going to cost them millions because they have to shut everything on their manufacturing side down because everything that they're doing is so sensitive.
Absolutely.
So, how are these companies weighing those things, and are we going to be able to maintain competitiveness over the next several years?
Yeah, if they have a real need for high reliability of power, low cost, the damage is so severe, like you said, if they have blips.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to know, is that power source and that provider, what's their track record, and is it going to be the best setup for them? So with nuclear power, we have some of the best generated power in this state through, and even just in York County, having that nuclear power supply. Mm-hmm. Natural gas, we've seen probably more of peaking plants where the demand hits a high point, then they turn on these natural gas supplied fuel or energy generating units, and then that kind of takes care of the gap of the supply side. Hydro, I think more and more we could tap into that, but again, we're limited that our river system and our infrastructure is kind of just set with that. Mm-hmm. And they did a good job of planning that, I guess, in the 70s. Mm-hmm. We're going to always see, I think, cost changes relative to material costs. Mm-hmm. That will be, it depends on how much it affects us here in the Southeast. We have little different transportation infrastructure. We have our port that can help us. It'll be interesting to see if more renewable energy comes into play and then that battery storage elements.
Yeah.
For us, renewable energies is not very big as a percent. Mm-hmm. The only thing I can see maybe a little bit more play in our market in the state is if the consumers demand it more, number one. But then if a commercial scale comes in, where we place it in the grid system. Remember, you have the generation and then you have the grid and then the retail. Mm-hmm. Or transmission, I should say, grid and transmission. So where the further you go out from the power supply, let's say the nuclear plant, the integrity and of the consistency of the power starts to degrade a little bit or a lot.
Yeah.
And so where you build up that system, just kind of going back in memory with my talks with Duke Energy and others, where you get a better system integrity, then that's where, you want to locate a plant or a community. Growth goes that way, and the power is more reliable. if it degrades, then you want to build that up. And so that's where you have to look at putting maybe solar or some renewables, biogas, whatever it is. I think that will be more important for our systems over time if we're not going to build any new plants. So how do you do that?
Yeah.
The other thing is security and safety. We saw that with the problems in North Carolina and out west recently with our transmission systems, our transformers and all that protected. We can't go down. We have too many dependent kids on their phones and adults at their computers saying, I got to have the juice, man. I can't go down. So it's all important. It's critical, just like roads, just like hospitals. It's kind of like that now.
Well, it sounds like we're, hopefully on a good track to continue to diversify our power supplies. And to your point, that's risk mitigation. If you've got nuclear on one side, you've got hydro on the other side, you have, solar somewhere else, or if you have the ability to spin up natural gas, then, you have different sources to pull from, which is fantastic. I don't want to, each of these individual topics, I feel like could be a whole show unto themselves. But we'll try to keep it moving a little bit. One thing that's on my mind a lot lately is, you mentioned our labor force and what that looks like. In your mind, how good are we at preparing people to enter into the labor force, given the needs and the demands that you see with companies in our local market or regional market? Our institutions like, Winthrop University, Clinton College, York Tech, our high schools, our vocational programs, are they equipped and designed to currently meet the needs of our employers and who our employers will likely be in the future? Yeah.
I think they've done a great job. They're doing things now that they know the market has forced them to do, probably accelerated. They've always done things like, let's say, healthcare, nursing programs, things like that. They've had it at York Tech, USC Upstate, or USC Lancaster and all that. I'm referring back to a meeting that was last night, actually. All these things they're accelerating, though, because the demand is there. The supply of labor is less, like for RNs, LPNs, folks in the nursing care areas. Got to have it. Got to have it. School teachers, that kind of thing, we got to have it because the data points are there that say the demand jobs are needing to be backfilled or filled, and we can't put enough through there. Now, they have accelerating programs that can get you your certificate and your degree a lot faster. The school systems are doing dual credit. That's fantastic. It probably wasn't a big focus, 10 years ago. Now that's out there. I will say our school system, working with the youth as well as our state government on apprenticeships, has really started to take off. When I got here 8 years ago, York County, like me, had one company doing it. I think we have over a dozen companies doing it now, and we're always working to do more. Other counties in the state have really had it for a longer period of time. I think primarily because they have more international companies that expected it and were willing to implement it. We've seen examples here of our international, primarily German companies that have put it in play here. But good thing is we're seeing American-owned businesses doing it now, because if you do not take your own responsibility to go get your own workforce and maybe create it yourself versus just saying, well, I'll just look for Johnny and Joe out there, I'll just hire them off the street. It doesn't work like that anymore. So they can start early, bring those youth in, or take an adult from York Tech that is transitioning to a new career, put them in a system, get a federal credit under apprenticeship, have programs that the state can help them develop. That's a win.
Yeah.
So I think all our school systems are focused on it. The challenge for them is cradle to career approach, continuing to engage our families, because a lot of these are family decisions that say, you know what, if you don't want to go to university or college, that's fine. But let's get you into something where you'll have an honest career potential. You'll have a trade. You'll be able to make a great wage. In fact, some of the wages that people come out of York Tech making are above what you would make after going to a Winthrop or a Charleston or a Clemson or USC.
Yeah, and your debt load might be a little less too.
Absolutely.
So.
In fact, there are programs that are high priority that you don't have to pay a dime.
Yeah.
Maybe gas money
Isn't that
to
cool?
get to school, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, so if we talk about all these different factors. If we're good at all those things and we get a passing grade on each of those things and we get an incentive that looks fantastic, to your earlier point, if we don't have inventory, if we don't have a site, it really doesn't matter. I mean, you can do fantastic. There's okay, great. Well, where are we going to go? If there's nothing available, there's nothing available. Yep. And I don't know if we can overstate kind of how that becomes the bottleneck or the big impediment to growth locally. We're aware of dozens of projects that we've missed out on.
Absolutely.
Because there just wasn't a site. Like projects that were on the menu, like, hey, everything looks great. There's just nowhere to go. Yep. What can and should be the role of economic development in helping? First of all, let's back that up a little bit. When we say inventory or a site, what exactly are we looking for? Like, what are the elements? Is it infrastructure? Is it, proximity to 77? What are the elements of a site that's ready? And then what can and should be the role of local government or economic development in general to help facilitate or work with developers to actually create these sites?
Sure. Yep. Number one challenge right now in York County. So sites, let's talk about it. So there's land and dirt, and then there's a site. And when we say site or property that's ready to go, shovel ready, let's call it, it means it's controlled and available with a set price or range in price. It's properly zoned. It's properly served by utilities with the known capacities to or known upgrades you got to make to get to a certain capacity. It has good accessibility and proximity to maybe an interstate or a 5-lane highway, that kind of thing. It meets the demands of environmental. It doesn't have any brownfield. Sometimes you can have a brownfield site that we've actually had customers say they're not afraid of a brownfield site, but typically it's greenfield, no brown, no contamination. Yeah. Brownfield means contamination.
Are there still grants or any other ways to offset the cost of remediating those brownfields?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And sometimes some federal programs give a bigger federal incentive if a company says they're going to go in and reclaim a brownfield industrial site. Think more like the Rust Belt in Northeast, where there's been historical industrial areas contaminated. Not so much in our case. So the site is ready to go. It's shovel ready. Now, in the case of our market, to be real clear and specific, our market is very blessed in that we've had a private sector market perspective that's driven value. The developers who are in it to make money. They buy or control property. They maybe make some of their own investments in the infrastructure to like roads and utility line extensions, that kind of thing. Then they create the site, they clear it, and then they put up a building. That building is built 9 times out of 10, probably speculatively. That is more of like a warehouse type building characteristic that we've seen in the last probably 5 to 6 years. And their model is built to do 2 things. One, lease it. Lease that building and all the buildings in their footprint that they are planning to build. The other that we've seen, this is very important to note, is that once they lease that asset, that building in particular, and get that company in there for, let's say, a 7 to 10 to 12-year lease, they capitalize that asset and they sell it in the market. That developer moves on to the next deal. Someone else owns the property. So that's their model. They do it to make money. They do it to, yes, have an impact. I can tell you a lot of those impacts are warehouse-driven in nature. That's what absorbs our land. That was what has had an impact. Good or bad, it's had an impact. Where the challenge is, and I stress, land absorption, is we have those guys and gals taking up land that they're not making any more land of in York County.
Yeah, especially with access to infrastructure.
Yeah, so where we have to look at it from a county economic development or county and city economic development perspective is, how do we maybe do it different so that we protect our position of not such a high level of land absorption? We have land development that is either going to happen because of the government initiative to control the land and develop the land, or a public-private partner initiative where we team up on the public side with a private developer that has development agreement in focus that says there will be land only for sale or partially for sale. Some spec built might happen. The utilities will be improved. The roads will be brought in, maybe in phases. There will be a shared cost maybe to that, or the public infrastructure is paid by the public body. Mm-hmm. There is set pricing.
We say public infrastructure, roads, water, sewer.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. So there's different ways to approach it. It's either all in on the public side or a collaborative of public-private. And I say that as a focus and a need right now because we're competing against the private side for slowing the land absorption, and also trying to maximize our potential for what you said is those missed opportunities where a single user wants to buy the land. Remember this too, in an urbanized area here in York County, as we are in Greenville, Spartanburg, Columbia, and other city areas in the state, public side has had to do less in this product development arena than in the past. In the rural area, just go to Chester County, Fairfield County, Lancaster County. The public side has had to do more, if not absolutely all of it, because there's no private sector market.
To incentivize even warehouse or distribution.
Yeah, to go in and play the role as developer. They build a county-owned spec building, develop a park, have to do it all. Yeah. And that is the difference.
So it's a blessing and a curse for us is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit because, some of the pushback in economic development is the land absorption with what some people might think of as an inferior project, which is, spec distribution, spec warehousing, whether it's, last mile distribution or, third-party logistics. Let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons because I think it's important to touch on that. We see a lot of it going up locally. Mm-hmm. You mentioned, we haven't really there's really little to no political or public participation in that type of development. We're not incentivizing it. We're not going out and building the roads. They're absorbing all those costs and basically paying the full assessment ratio. Yep. So, what are the pros and cons of that type of development? And how does it factor into, we mentioned this stew of elements that goes into the decision-making process. If you're a manufacturer, is it important in your decision-making process to have access to distribution or, warehousing for your inputs if you're engaged in just-in-time inventory management for your own process? Like, is it necessary to have some degree of bandwidth in that space just to be able to accommodate a manufacturer that you might actually want?
Yeah. To answer your question there at the end, yes, you have to have available warehouse space for finished goods and raw materials. Mm-hmm. Not every small, medium, and large business has warehouse space under their own roof. So they have to go out and seek it. So they may work with a third-party logistics company to maintain that raw material for them that gets delivered to the production facility, and then that third-party group picks up the finished good and then stores it at their warehouse that might be here in York County. Mm-hmm. So you got to have that as part of the local economy asset mix, 100%. Where it becomes a challenge is when we're overrun or we have too much in just warehousing, and let's say that warehousing is a warehouse that has a finished good in it and online vendor has operations there, and they're importing majority of those goods from offshore, i.e. China, and then just ship to consumer or to business versus being truly part of the manufacturing environment that we have in the local community or the state. I think there's two differentials there that we have to be very cognizant of. You have to have both, but you can't have more of one than the other. The pros to having warehouse is, yes, available space. They do provide jobs in warehouses. In some cases, and we've seen this in some urbanized areas or areas that it's just specialty warehousing, they may have more automation than people. And with automation becomes capital investment, and that creates more tax base in some cases. We've seen examples. I know like Kroger, I think, has some big warehouses that huge investment because it's all automated. Pick and pack is no longer done by 100 people. It's done by 2 people, and they have to just make sure the machinery's running.
Yeah, but that machinery might be $150 million worth of machinery.
Exactly. Job-wise, they're still out there, but wages we do know have gone up in the warehouse industry, logistics industry.
Yeah.
And you can have some good positions in there. Like my son's studying supply chain for his major at Anderson University. And so I've talked to him a lot about it, and he's seen many examples in local manufacturers. I've tried to push him towards that, but I've explained to him, you could also go work at a warehouse. And work for like locally Ross or, DHL or those kind of companies because they'll hire you. So there's good jobs, good diversity of economic base to grow. The cons are you oftentimes will see that high land absorption, the truck impacts, the trucking in and out. Depends on the type of operation that's going on, but it can sometimes have a negative impact in an area that might already be saturated. I will say this, the one good thing on new developments when they're done in York County and our cities is there's a traffic impact analysis that is required. So it's taken into account by the type of development that's going to occur there. If it's a warehouse use, they do trip calculations and say, it's going to be okay under the current road infrastructure setup, or no, you want to build that, you have to make these improvements, and then that'll help cause less problems.
It's funny. I catch myself all the time where I'll drive by a distribution. I'm like, do we really need more of this? But then if I order something online, I really want it the next day. If I order something on Amazon, I'm like, is it going to be delivered tomorrow? It's, I guess, if you want that convenience of being able to order something and get it, or I don't know, your grocery store being filled with food,
right?
You've got to have some storage capacity in your area. So
100%. And, we're blessed in that our country has a lot of these resources to make certain industries and new economies go well.
Yeah.
How many times have people used Amazon in the last 5 to 10 years, and we're just in time next day here? Didn't even used to be that way maybe 4 years ago. But if you're in, I'll just say Afghanistan, not happening.
Yeah. No, and I think that's going to be even more likely over the next 10 or 20 years where we're going to have all kinds of good stuff. Yeah. We can really nerd out on a lot of this stuff for a long time, but I'm curious, I've known you for a long time, but I've never actually asked you this question. Let's pretend for a minute, like if somebody called tomorrow with a project, what's the profile? What would it look like your holy grail project that you would just say, oh man, this is the best one ever? Like what would be the ideal phone call for you to get tomorrow?
Yeah. In our business, it's kind of like you like to take pride in, I got this medal for, this tour of duty. And, I believe in our warriors and what they accomplish day in and day out. But, it's not just one project that you went on. Yes, home run, grand slams. If you ask me what is my grand slam, it would be great to have an OEM, right? A Boeing and all that kind of stuff. And yet I can walk away from visiting a company that we landed that maybe only hired 10 people.
Yeah.
And say, and I know it's a good deal when they're happy with what service we delivered and the county's delivering on what we said we're going to do. They're happy with the employees that they found. Like, I'll say this, I went to a company over in Waterford. Mm-hmm. This was in December, and they started up kind of slow. I was a little surprised. I thought they were going to go gung-ho. They're moving stuff down from Ohio. Sales with COVID kind of hit them and sent them back. But when we toured their facility, he pointed out the new investment, and he said, these guys have been trained, and he hired people from the community, and those guys were top notch. I could see that they were excited about what they were doing. And then we walked around and on the finishing goods side, and so he introduced us to some of the employees. Now, it was interesting to hear, he said, in that area, that last area we visited, 4 of the employees all came from another company. Now, we're always attuned to that, like, are we robbing from Peter to pay Paul? But I asked the one employee who was working there, I said, how is it working here compared to elsewhere? And I don't need to name the elsewhere, but he said 100 times better, because this team and this company treat us well. Mm-hmm. They believe in us. They've given us a chance to be a part of the business and the startup and the excitement that's here. Whereas the other company was on maybe a different approach and a different trajectory. Things weren't going as well. And so companies have to stay hungry, mm-hmm. small, medium, and large. And so what excites me is when there's that match and that really win-win for our people and the companies that say they want to be a part of here, and they actually deliver on that. And that can happen on the big ones. I mean, we've had some big ones here, mm-hmm. and we have some big ones that keep doing things, like Schaeffler does things, Stanley Black & Decker, Atlas Copco. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can name the big ones, but there's a lot of little ones too that are cool.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that, because what really gets the headlines oftentimes is, you know, the big new project that we land.
Yeah.
But what we see a lot of, in up through August of this year, all of the projects that came through economic development were expansions of existing sites.
Right.
And, you know, I think one of the myths that I think, you know, we need to dispel maybe right here and right now is that economic development is just new stuff. It's right. just a new company coming into the area. How do you work with existing companies, and what incentives are even available to existing companies when they do decide to expand, sure. which is what we want?
Yep, absolutely. So it's estimated in the United States anywhere from 70 to 80% of our local economies are helped through expansions of existing companies. Mm-hmm. That's service companies and also manufacturing. So how we do it here in York County, and have done it for years, is it's about relationships. That relationship starts first on the front end when we recruit them here, mm-hmm. all right? And as part of our process internally, we transition the relationship and introduce them to our business retention expansion manager. Her name is Teresa Curtis. Mm-hmm. She's been here 35 years.
Yeah, she probably has the best Rolodex in York County.
Yeah, exactly. And so the great thing is Teresa's here, and others that we partner with, if it's a city or, let's say, South Carolina Manufacturing Extension Partnership, Department of Commerce. We have a focus on retention. Mm-hmm. So that's really good. One thing that's unique, just like businesses that transition people into retirement, into the retirement and phase out of companies, we know that happens in our county government, as you know. One of the things we're trying to maximize is Teresa's time with us is, hey, what do we know about these companies? So we implement a CRM that tracks this stuff, and she's doing a great job. We're all making sure we capture everything we can about what have we done with that company. Mm-hmm. So when we communicate with them, if it's a human resource council that we have, a safety council, business pulse survey that we do, those kind of things are important, because that's all part of retention. Knowing what we should know, figuring it out, trying to solve solutions, and then go forward. To ask the question about, can that company that's here get the same incentive? if they're going to invest and do things, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
What's good for the new is good for the existing. It's all performance-based.
Mm-hmm.
Do we consider it, special a little bit, emphasis that they're an existing company? Heck yeah,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. Because it's easier to take care of a existing customer than it is the new one in terms of, is there marketing cost to go get the new one versus just saying, hey, I know you, we're good.
Not to mention, one of our companies is another county's prospect.
Right.
They would love nothing more than for us to just ignore an existing company when they want to expand or tell them no, that we're not going to participate with any kind of incentive. And they can say, hey, well, you can replicate everything you're doing over here. And I don't know, even Cherokee or Chester or Union or, a lot of the things that we have, other areas would just love to have.
And let me stress something on that, because where you get a Honeywell, let's say that's out in Clover, manufacturing something. And Clover's a small community, but its labor market is decent size, but it's not big, right? It's part of York County, but there's a tighter labor market. Mm-hmm. They may say, well, we want to evaluate an expansion, and there's benefits to putting it at that location, but because it's a new line or specialty line that needs to be separated, maybe it has a higher labor force content. Mm-hmm. We may get a chance at it, but we might not, because they don't feel like that location, at that expansion location, is the best for their business decision. Mm-hmm. We ask for an opportunity to win, that earn that business, but let's be real. If we can't have it here, we want it in the region or the state, Southeast, United States, that kind of perspective. But you're right. Our local people are someone else's prospect.
Yeah. We could talk a lot about all kinds of stuff, but I want to leave it up to you to kind of wrap up. What is one thing that you want people to know about York County, what we have to offer, and economic development in general? Yeah.
I mean, I think our track record is proven, right? We are doing and have done the right things for economic development for our community and our region. We're part of a region that's vibrant, so people should always consider York County as part of something to look at in the mix of evaluation locations. We will compete for your business. It doesn't mean that we will go to the bottom of the barrel and try to get everything that is out there, because let's face it, we're not the lowest cost location, but we're a competitive cost location. We don't have everything to everybody, but give us a chance and we'll compete for it. And I think that's what our community wants, is to be able to say, we want good things here. We should earn what we get. It doesn't always fall in our lap. Sometimes we got to earn it. And earning it sometimes means making big, bold decisions, visionary decisions that says, we're going to do something different. Like, I know I give applause to Rock Hill because they've done crazy great things in downtown. It's really reminding me, and has reminded me and a few others I know that have come over from Greenville when we were over there in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
And I saw downtown take off. Same thing here.
Yeah.
It's amazing how that it just is running parallel path. It doesn't mean, though, that we just kind of rest on our laurels or don't think differently and outside the box. Like, for instance, in York County, the quality of life element, we got good things here, but you know what? Maybe quality of life means something different today than it did 10 years ago. So, this idea of a big park, that's cool.
Really big.
Really
1,900
big.
acres. Yeah, that's really a big park.
Oh, maybe now we look at trails that connect people and places. Like, for instance, maybe an ambitious next goal is the trail between York and Rock Hill on that
railbed
trail. So there's opportunities out there that people need to know. York County is here. We're not going to rest on our laurels. We're also going to have to stay hungry.
Yeah, and not take any of it for granted, right?
Absolutely, because we're a good place. We're not the best place to everybody.
Right.
That's why I don't call it quality of life, because everybody has a great quality of life in the United States. There's different degrees of it.
Yeah.
It's more of quality of place.
Yeah.
Is our place of quality, or is it somewhere that, has problems? And there are people up north in the United States, I know their economy is sucking wind. Mm-hmm. We're blessed here.
We really are. Well, David, thank you for your time today,
man.
I appreciate it. Yeah, we'll have to do this again soon.
Absolutely. We can dive in some more. That's great.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Thank you.